and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. My guest today is Matthew Ehret, and we're going to talk about his new book. I don't think he needs too much of an introduction. He's been on the show many, many times. He's a phenomenal historian, researcher, author, and he's just come out with this trilogy, The Revenge of the Mystery Cults, and boy, are we seeing this. It does seem like they are in revenge, and they're definitely in revival. So we're going to start off talking about some other stuff that's related mostly to his second book. And just because I am one of those people who likes to do things totally out of order, we got started talking before we pressed record, and the conversation was kind of very pertinent to a few chapters that are in his second book. So we might touch on some of the first, and if not, we'll do a sequel, and we'll bring him back because I'm sure there's no shortage of material here. So, and before I bring Matt on, I just want to encourage you to support the work I'm doing because we're kind of at a crossroads here. But I do have really exciting news because we are going to be launching a product. This is part of why we have slowed down a little bit. We haven't put up as many shows because we are launching a business, and there will be a new product available. So I won't talk too much about that now, but hopefully you will purchase it because I think it's super exciting and fantastic. Honestly, I've used it. I'm really excited about it, and it'll be a great way to support the work I'm doing here. But currently, we have all of the links below, and you can check out my website, CourtenayTurner.com. That is spelled like Courtenay, CourtenayTurner. And we have all sorts of ways you can directly support through the Buy Me a Coffee link, through the Venmo, which is Courtenay, again spelled like Courtenay -Turner at Venmo. We also have a Give, Send, Go option. And for those of you who like the snail mail option, which I recently learned was coined by Jim Rudd, the granddaddy of Game B. But that is Courtenay Turner at 6041 Rural Plains Circle, Suite 110, number 106, Franklin, Tennessee, 37064. And then, of course, we have great products like the relaxed saunas, which I know it's really cold where I am, and I'm sure it is for many of you as well. So these are always a fun way to warm up. You can use your promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, and that will get you a $100 discount on your far infrared saunas and lamps. And then we also have the Richardson Nutrition Center. And I do have an episode coming out with John Richardson, who is the son of Dr. John Richardson, who led G. Edward Griffin, the legendary G. Edward Griffin, who wrote A World Without Cancer. So you can check out all that literature as well as get all of your B17 needs and use promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, at rncstore.com. And then I also would like to invite you to check out my Substack, which I started about 5 months ago. And as I said, I've pulled that back a little bit, but I will be really ramping up again. I've got a bunch of articles in the works, so I will be releasing those hopefully pretty soon. And if you could subscribe there, and if you can be a paid subscriber, that would be awesome. We are probably going to be starting to do a lot more premium. That is also where we launch first. So the podcast goes there first, and we might start doing some ad-free ones as well, time permitting and resources permitting. So check out all of that. And without further ado, let's bring on Matthew Ehret. How are you doing today?
Courtenay, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, this is a bit of a technical difficulties to start, but we're rolling. So
smooth waters now. We got through the storm, so it's good. We're smooth sailing from here on out. Nothing can go wrong now. We had a lot of technical issues for those watching, not realizing the hour of excruciating technical issues. So I'm glad things have come together. So I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, and that's probably a good segue to start up. I actually recently tweeted tonight that I don't understand why, but like two things can't simultaneously coexist, why we can't be excited and hopeful about some of the things that the new administration in this country are putting forth, things like, exiting the WHO. There's been a whole bunch of things that I think we can be really excited about. But that also there's a lot of things that I'm very concerned about. And one of them seems to be this looming technocracy. And of course, he's proposing to purchase Canada your country as the 51st state, and he's also talking about acquiring Greenland as well. And I had talked about this recently too. I said strategically it's genius, and I do mean that. It is strategically genius. However, it is also exactly what Technocracy Inc. laid out as the technate. It's what the Club of Rome laid out as in their regionalized and adaptive global systems document in 1973. It's also what Brzezinski and Kissinger talked about, how there would be a dissolution of nation states that would leave just these remnants of power blocks that would create a hegemonic battle between the East and West, so that the technocracy could emerge. So all of these things don't sound great, but there's also potential that that's not what he's envisioning, and that this is really a strategic move that will be a potential to create more freedom. And what are your thoughts on any of that? That's a lot.
Yeah, well, I had a debate earlier tonight with a monarchist who was absolutely offended by the proposition of Canada becoming Republican, either as a standalone republic or joining the U.S. Absolutely offended. So I took an opposing poll, making the point that we have not benefited our interests by remaining loyal to the systems of hereditary power that are the crown and its shadow governing institutions through the Privy Council office, the sort of cybernetics nerve center that's been shaping all of the domestic and foreign policy as a shadow government for centuries, as baked into that didn't benefit us. And this ideology of the crown, that it, which is more than the individual sitting on the crown, has really kept Canada underdeveloped. Just look at a satellite image of Canada and it's like the most underdeveloped country for the size. It's pathetic how little development. I mean, all of it is like within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border, all of our big cities, except for maybe, Calgary and Edmonton. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, it's pathetic. And
Edmonton does have the largest mall.
Yeah,
West Edmonton Mall.
Yeah, you got a little roller coaster in there. That's fun. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
There's a submarine in there.
Yeah, it's cool.
In the water park.
Yeah,
it's where I went bungee jumping.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they got that going for him. So
yeah.
Otherwise, it's been pathetic. So if you have a change, and in terms of the constitutional systems of Republican types of government, there's a lot more freedom of the people to exercise an influence over policy. There's an ability for representatives to abide by their conscience instead of being subdued by a party dynamic. So, and there's no hereditary powers that you have to pay any fealty to, unlike the governor general, the lieutenant governors of any constitutional monarchical system,
right?
Which have veto rights, have to give royal assents, have back channel policies or maneuverings that have no bearing on what the people actually want or need. So I took a pro join the republic position. But then I've also had a little bit of a dispute with somebody who was absolutely radically so blindly pro MAGA that they wanted to join the Republic so badly that they were trying to rationalize why the idea of human machine integration and biometrics were perfectly fine and patriotic when it's done by Elon Musk and not by Yuval Harari or something. And I was like, no. That would be wrong. I'd rather not join that kind. If that's the dynamic shaping the thing we're joining, then it's better that we do not do that. So, a lot of people have been thinking in a binary way. They want a full, easy, simple answer so they don't have to challenge their minds to think about nuance. And they want that so badly, so they get pissed off at you, Courtenay, because you don't abide by those binaries. I tend to try to avoid those things too.
Yeah. And
we know that there's most things in life are a mixture of the good and the bad. And we're trying to figure out how do we amplify the good and, contain and diminish the influence of the bad in things. which is difficult to do, again, when people especially have been trained to want simple, easy, crystallized answers. It's like, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And I mean, when you're discussing the MAGA situation, the criticism that I've gotten is, I did advocate voting for him. I supported him over Kamala Harris. And and now that I've been pointing out some things that I'm concerned about, like a lot of his appointees, like this, $500 billion Stargate program, that's not giving me the warm fuzzy. They're talking about mRNA. It feels a little like Operation Warp Speed 2.0. I don't know. I don't have all the details, but it feels a little bit like that. Not only does it feel like that, but of course, he did he pushed back against the CBDCs, right? He put in I think it was an executive order saying that he will not allow those, which is great. I'm all for that. But I've also presented that my concern is that we would have this Hegelian battle between the top-down infrastructure, that both of them are surveillance states, but there would be the top-down WEF, Bank of International Settlements, central bank type of digital currency that, the UN and all of these central banks are going to support. And then on the other side, the people who don't want that, because a lot of people are now aware of the perils that might present, you're going to be offered these stable coins, these crypto coins, Bitcoins, not just Bitcoin, but of course he's advocating for Bitcoin. I thought he was at the Bitcoin conference and he's talking about Bitcoin being the reserve coin. But I think that kind of leads you into a network state. So you have these two battles, but both of them end up in kind of a surveillance technocratic regime. And I'm not in favor of either of those, but just to wrap this, but when I point out some of these concerns, and those are not my only concern, the response I get is, oh, well, you told us to vote for Trump. So, you're just a normie pretending not to be. And I'm like, I don't understand why we can't acknowledge that we may have more hope and opportunity with one. That doesn't mean that there aren't significant concerns and potentially problems, but we might have an opportunity to voice those concerns. And hopefully the idea of a republic is, as you said, that people could be, disruptors, that people could be agents and voice their concerns and act as in self-governance.
Yeah, no, that's a great, I think that is a good point. And, you're in a situation where it's like if we're under the Biden Kamala sort of, prior structure of governance. I see it much like I would a boat which is irreparably sinking and everyone's going to die. Yep. And then there's this other boat that is floating, but there's cannibals on it. And so, the choice is to stick on the boat and drown, or jump on the boat that is floating and be prepared to learn how to fight cannibals. And, you got these death cultists that are abounding. We know that they've got very malevolent, occult, religious motives that are very anti-human. We know that, and we see them around Trump. The thing is, when I look at things like the Club of Rome's agenda for the world carved up into these bioregions that they put out in the 60s, or the
1973, I believe, the document, the regionalized, the regionalized adaptive, global systems was 1973, but
yeah. So that structure of Club of Rome ideology is based upon the premise that the world is a closed system with a limited carrying capacity that can only sustain about a maximum of 1 billion human lives,
right?
Which is what their computer models had generated. And there's a little bit of a dispute amongst these, like whether it's 2 billion or maybe 1 billion or 1.5 billion. And they have these debates.
500
million, and then, but they're false debates because it all involves mass extermination of human lives and the implementation of absolute constraints and regulations on birth and on how much you are allowed to consume and other things to keep things in a stabilized Gaia worshipping situation of zero and even negative technological growth, where the only technology that would be permitted would be that technology that better maintains the slave class
Right.
But that doesn't actually improve the powers of industrial labor, the overall means to introduce new technologies, to make discoveries that translate into new forms of improved relations between our industrial power and the future. So the idea of limiting ourselves to scarcity, increasing or decreasing the human footprint, the as they call it, the carbon footprint, which is a euphemism for human quantity of human lives that we want to permit. So you have to their type of system, and the type that Mark Carney, Mario Draghi, other World Economic Forum gurus had been advocating, following the logic of Maurice Strong and Alexander King, the founder of the Club of Rome, is all based on a closed system idea of shutting down the means of supporting life and increasing scarcity. That's the Georgia Guidestones, blown up a few years ago, but still the intention exists. And so what I'm looking at historically has been a battle between open versus closed system thinking. So it's not necessarily the thing unto itself. Like, one could say, anytime you have a nation state that, like the US became, coming out of a very divided set of British colonies, that involved greater control, which could be then abused. But that's where you need to have a moral, active citizenry, which is engaged in the process as citizens and not subjects, to ensure that the type of more centralized power that was the effect of the creation of the Constitution would not be used against the people, but would be an instrument of the people, by the people, and for the people. So it comes back to, always the subjective individual at the end of the day, that the fault is not in our stars but in ourselves, right? That we are underlings, as Shakespeare's Cassius had said. So we always have to, and people, they don't want to take that subjective thing into their consideration. So when I look at, is this idea of an expanded USA that involves Greenland and Canada and a bunch of Latin America, is that intrinsically a bad thing? Well, it may be a bad thing if the governing ideology is that shut down civilization, impose a closed system, which involves a high priesthood master class to discern or define what are the limits to growth that we should all adapt ourselves to, like animals. Then that would be absolutely a bad thing. But if you have like a pro-industrial open system ethos that values life as being something sacred, and that values the idea of leaping over the limits to growth, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But the fact is, it is a real concern, because we do have these transhumanist freaks embedded around Trump, including a bunch of end time Zionist fanatics like Pete, Hegseth, Rubio's a neocon. Very, very bad people from the neocon front, who some of them have even spoken about rebuilding Solomon's temple in the Middle East, which we know certain end times fanatics around Netanyahu have desperately wanted as part of their eschatology, that they believe is going to be needed to usher in the greater Israel agenda for a new kingdom wherein the Messiah can come. That's a thing.
And no, it is a thing. I want to ask your thoughts on that before we move on to that, anything else, because this is always a very difficult, because it has been created as a dialectic, intentionally so. I think part of the, just even the term Zionism, could only work in a dialectical framework, right? It was needed to be the, supposedly the safe space, but really the outpost, right? So it had to be a dialectical narrative in order for it to even exist. But when people, because people don't really, they're so attached to one side or the other, one end of the pole, that I don't think they really understand when you talk about the Greater Israel Project. And I could be wrong on this, but I don't think they're talking about a Greater Israel in the way that, like, a lot of Christian Zionists think of it as a holy land for the Jews. I think that they're trying to create like basically like a new Babylon. Like, this is really about creating a, I don't know. It looks like a kind of a Luciferian safe haven, not a. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll just do a little on that point, since you're bringing it up, and it does play into actually volume 1 of the Revenge of the
Here we go. We go back.
I actually had a little screen that I had saved up. So if you want to do a screen share, Houston.
Because you addressed quite a bit of it in volume 1 as well. Yeah.
I did, yeah, and you're correct. At the end of the day, the first chapter of volume 1 is this thing called Sir Henry Kissinger, Midwife to New Babylon, which gets at that very question you just posed, which is that Zionism is not what people thought it was. And I begin with the hook within the article, citing Henry Kissinger in a 2012 address or an interview, right, where he was asked by, I think it was a Jerusalem Post journalist who asked him, what do you see of Israel in 10 years? And he said, in 10 years, there will be no more Israel. Yeah. And that totally bewildered the journalist, but he's part of the inner sanctum, right? He's a Bilderberger steering committee member. He is a CFR trilateral commission, CFR. His mentor was a Rhodes Scholar, the leading Rhodes Scholar, William Yandell Elliott, who shaped a massive part of the neocon intelligentsia and the liberal globalist intelligentsia at the same time, out of Harvard. So this Kissinger was knighted, as a knight of St. Michael and St. George, which is a Mithraic cult that was, embedded into the British Empire over 130 years ago. So he was knighted by the crown, by the queen. So he gets the big joke. And the big joke is that Israel's not the thing people thought it was. It had a role to play within a broader process, but it was never supposed to be a forever thing. It had that role involved the creation of and use of certain organized crime syndicates that would be tied to Meyer Lansky, the Bronfmans. They had a role to play within the broader machinery of the system that was designed to undermine the viability of sovereign nation states in a world of cooperating sovereign nation states working for the interests of their culture and their people. That was the target. That's the simple. If people want a simple answer, that's the simplest answer I can give them. That the motive of the empire has been to destroy the thing I just outlined. That potential of a world dynamic of harmonized human beings acting in mature moral intellectual fortitude for each other's benefit and for their own benefit at the same time through a world of cooperating sovereign nation states. That's what the whole game has been, to destroy that. So to that extent, there's Greater Israel. Greater Israel was always the idea of bringing about a covenant that was supposedly promised to Moses thousands of years ago that would involve this land being a ethno-nationalist, is place for the Jews, that would involve taking up all of Iraq, most of Syria, a third of today's Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, a bunch of Egypt, which is where there's currently it seems a very big hotspot of the IDF talking about or preparing for an invasion of Egypt pretty soon, which could be facilitated if you have Muslim Brotherhood connected organizations launching missiles from Egypt that would give them the excuse that they want. So they like having more radicalized ISIS or even Hamas groups around them, because it creates a state of victimhood, of fear that they need to have as part of the embedded identity that would then have Jewish people living in the holy or in the desert giving consent to go and preemptively attack those aggressors, which ironically then makes them the aggressor, as we've seen now in the case of the subduing of the Gaza. And as you pointed out, when you look at the boundary conditions of this Greater Israel dynamic that Theodore Herzl was putting forth, what you have is something that looks very similar to Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, and the actual mapping. Here, let's do the sharing of my screen once more. Just share my. Do you see my screen? Oh, there it is. Okay, good. So there's the Greater Israel. And if you go down in the article, I have the actual diagram here of Babylon, which is right here. So that's the 586 to 539 Nebuchadnezzar Babylon, where that held the Jews in captivity for some time. And before Cyrus the Great released them. But during that time in captivity, it seems like there was a certain reorganization of certain sacred texts. The basis of today's modern Kabbalah finds its roots also during that time, when certain rabbinical leaders under Babylon were induced to infuse certain Babylonian myths into the construction of the agreed upon text that then became sort of, baked into the broader belief structure, and the idea of a Kabbalistic interpretation of those religious texts, for knowable only to an inner elite that are high as a kite, typically on drugs, that then blubber in a altered state certain mutterings that might be sounds one would make by just reading the symbols from the Hebrew texts within a certain environment with certain ideas of the Sephirot, of the Ein Sof, certain ideas of the metaphorical cathedral of Solomon's temple as a metaphorical thing that is organized to unite all of those initiates together, is something that they also use to guide their idea of how they related to the idea of Solomon's temple, whether it was the first one that got destroyed, or the second one that was destroyed again in the Jewish-Roman wars, or the third one that Julian the Apostate promised to build but that didn't get completed, or that the Knights Templar were committed to building as part of some initiatory end times ritual, or that currently is the obsession of the Netanyahu Likudniks that also want to build this temple, as does Peter Hegseth, who's given a speech about the need to reconstruct the third temple. So it's not just a temple; it's not a building. For them, it's something that's it's spiritualized matter, that they have certain proportions geometrically that are in harmony with their idea of what the tree of life is, and that there's this infusion of matter and spirituality, where spirituality becomes dominated by material considerations. So it's a fake spirituality. It's tied to blood and soilism as a cult as well, that the physical soil of that particular location is the spirit of the people. And as I get across in my book, the big joke is that those who helped create that state of Israel as a movement in the 19th century were anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic fascists.
That's what I was going to get at. Yeah. And it's not about protecting the Jewish people. I mean, I have my stance on it is again nuanced, which people don't like, because I think once you've created this place and now you've got the people there, they are victims because you've used them as a scapegoat. So, it's way more complicated than a lot of people want to tell me. Oh, it's so simple. If it were so simple, I don't think we'd be watching what we're watching. But I think it's important for people to know that I think a lot of people, I think there are people, it's tiers, like always, and with any kind of, cult, or certainly when you're dealing with the occult, you have these inner circles and then outer circles. So I think, certainly the people in the inner core who are maybe at the top, driving things, I think that they're aware of the greater agenda, and that this is really to create a, greater Babylon, not to create a greater Israel in the sense of, a holy land for the Jewish people. But I think a lot of people, they've intentionally convinced people that that's the plan. And ultimately, a greater Babylon does not help the Jewish people. So, yeah, that's I think that's the big lie, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that I think Israel should be, decimated, or, that now the people are there, right? So it's, you now have a situation that's been created because they were used as scapegoats, which looks like throughout history, that's what I see. They've been used as scapegoats. Yeah. So.
Well, I got actually something here, and you're right. Throughout history, that's been the typical tendency has been to. I mean, the Jews have had it pretty bad for a lot of history. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that the early Jewish prophets were, there's evidence that there was a massive war waged against the human sacrificial practices of the mystery cults, especially Moloch, but also Baal and Ashtoreth. And you see it all throughout the Old Testament.
Sure.
Where the prophets organized to destroy that entire system of governance, superstitious religious control, and especially human sacrifice. And they've never been forgiven for their what they did to undermine an entire system of global controls, which the empire has been doing in secret underground for the past 2,000 years, as people watching this have, I'm sure, discovered, but also what they want to normalize to their ideas to make this completely mainstream again, just like it was, before the prophets had succeeded in their battles against Moloch. They want to do it again, and that's how they see Solomon's temple. So those who created the foundations of political Zionism, even Christian Zionism, the people like John Nelson Darby, the founder of the Plymouth Brethren, or Charles Warren, who did the original excavations of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, following the direct guidance of King Edward VII, who was the same King Edward that was like the first royal. He was still the prince at the time, but who went to the Holy Land since Richard the Lionheart. And as soon as Edward VII, the guy who orchestrated what became World War I, that same Richard VII, when he went to the Holy Land, the first thing he did is he tattooed a giant cross of the Kingdom of Jerusalem on his chest.
This is the Knights of Sepulchre.
That's the same. Yes, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. It used the banner of the Temple of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and that was the kingdom for 260 years. That was typically under the hereditary institution of the crown. It was a Crusader-run mess of a disaster, but something that I think that they have wanted to revive.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah. But to revive it means getting rid of the Jews and Arabs who have been living there. And what better way to do that than to have them just do it to themselves?
Right.
And, things like the Samson option. And just to exemplify that point, there's a slide here that features a quote by a figure who's so important. And most Christians have no idea. Most Westerners have no idea. Most Jews don't even realize the influence that this guy had. His name is Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook, who was the British selected head Ashkenaz rabbi for British Mandate Palestine. Because keep in mind, before Israel was carved out as a nation, it was Palestine, and the British had gotten control of it after the Ottoman Empire was induced to collapse and disintegrate as part of the effects of World War I, which King Edward VII was the lead architect in organizing his idiot nephews to go ahead and just agree to kill each other stupidly for several years, right?
It wasn't called Palestine, though, was it?
Yeah, I've looked at some 19th century maps, and there's Palestine is sort of the name that I saw on the map featuring that zone within the context of the Ottoman Empire. So that was still like sort of a region that had the name, but then again, not all maps disagree with each other too, because a lot of this has to do with who's making the map.
Exactly.
What do they want, right?
Very true.
Consensus is not always easy when it comes to battles of empire. But so this, there he is. That's it looks like a harmless guy, hugely influential. So the British selected this Kabbalist to be the head Ashkenaz rabbi. He was working very closely with a bunch of fascists around Jabotinsky, who is the figure who Benjamin Netanyahu's father was the personal secretary for. And so he says this in this book, the most sacred of his books, as I've come to learn, called the Ehret. And he's describing the end times. And in it, he says, and I'll quote it for those maybe just listening or driving, "The truth concerning the land is revealed in Kabbalah. Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, militates for life in the land of Israel. Rationalistic approaches to Judaism place no value on the land of Israel. In wars, national characters crystallize. Israel, as the universal reflection of mankind, benefits thereby. The heels of Messiah follow upon world conflagration," which is another word for just burning everything. "At the hour of the downfall of Western civilization, Israel is called upon to fulfill its divine mission by providing the spiritual basis for a new world order." So he's basically admitting several things here, that he believes it's necessary, it's actually divinely ordained that it thus must happen, that Western civilization must collapse, must go through a downfall, that the return of the Messiah, or in this case, the coming of the Messiah for the first time, because they missed the ball the last time around, it must coincide with world conflagration, and that somehow the Kabbalah is their guidepost for how to navigate making that happen, which is where it gets really messed up. Yeah. So part of that world conflagration involves the idea of the Samson doctrine, because people wonder, like, how could a nation which is supposed to care about its own interest come up with something as absurdly insane as a Samson doctrine in its military. No nation would do that. What must underlie the construction of that type of military strategy? And you know what the Samson doctrine is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
maybe you give just a little summary for those who might not be familiar.
If you feel like you're going to lose, murder suicide. So it's just the idea of Israel acquiring the nuclear weapons that it did covertly in the 60s had a lot to do with the idea not just of having a defensive capability of threatening anybody who would threaten them. It wasn't just that. The idea of the Samson doctrine that Golda Meir formulated after the war, I think it was after 1973, I believe, don't quote me on that, was that it was a threat to Israel's allies as well, and to its own people, saying that if they feel like they're not having their will met by their allies, they will kill everybody around them. They will strike Europe. They will strike American outposts. They will kill as well as kill their own people, like Samson did in his last days after he had his hair cut off by Delilah.
Isn't Golda Meir the one who said that Kissinger was such a hero?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Which is interesting that Kissinger would be the guy who's also, doing a little tongue-in-cheek, just saying that Israel's not going to exist. Because he knows he's in on the inside joke. Most of the Israelis living there are not in on the joke. The Samson option. Seymour Hersh did a piece on that. So I think when I looked at in that chapter on New Babylon that I cited as the opening of my Revenge of the Mystery Cults Volume 1, I read a lot of the writings of the figures who were closely aligned with John Nelson Darby. I referenced here the founder of the exclusive Plymouth Brethren. It's a hyper acidic, not acidic like Jewish Hasidic, but it's an ascetic, I should say, a withholding, kind of like pseudo Calvinist, pseudo austere, a very austere, version of Christianity that was an outgrowth of a Jesuitical operation that happened in the 1820s, when certain Jesuitical texts that interpreted the end times in a very weird way that's not at all in the Bible. These were texts that were discovered in by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Maitland. I forgot his first name, but he was basically doing some scouring in the Vatican archives. I don't know how an Anglican Canterbury priest got or archbishop got permission to go into the Vatican archives, but he did.
There seems to be a lot of coordination there too.
There does seem to be, because they're not supposed to get along very well. The Anglicans and the Catholics are not supposed to be on the same page, but here we go. Yes. And he pulled out a bunch of Jesuitical texts written by this figure, this Jesuit named Francisco Ribera, and he was an architect of the Council of Trent. That was from the 1540s, lasted for a few decades, and that was the Counter-Reformation Council. So the reactionary Catholic response to Protestantism was arranged at this council that called for basically an iron fist of scorched earth to come down against the new Protestants. So instead of trying to find any type of rational basis of coexistence between Catholic and Protestant, which is what many of the better church leaders were trying to do as human beings, they're like, no, we got to go heavy-handed and just like start this forever multi-generational revanchism, which they did, and it became, the peasants' wars, the destruction of whole villages. And of course, that creates a lot of bad blood between Protestants and Catholics. So that's what ended up successfully pulling Europe into these forever wars of religion. The 30 Years' War just being one aspect of that.
Sure.
And so Ribera was, during this time, he organized an interpretation of the Bible texts around this idea of sending the Jews of the world to the Holy Land in a way that would help create an environment in which the Antichrist could emerge, and thus actualize how they interpreted certain writings by John that were highly metaphorical, highly allegorical within the book of Revelations, as it's come to be called, as well as some elements from Daniel, but basically highly metaphorical writings. He then said, okay, we can interpret this not as though it was something that has already happened which many people, the majority, I would say, of Christians believe that he was talking about things that had already happened.
Right.
As far as the end of an age during the time of Nero's persecution of the Christians, which happened a little bit after John had written those letters. But he's like, no, let's project that not only out of the past and out of the present, because a lot of other Protestants were looking at that thinking, well, maybe the Catholic Church in the present is the Antichrist that's being discussed, and they were interpreting it that way. So he's like, that's also not helping us. So let's put it into the future, and that future time will coincide with certain things. And of those things, we'll have to have the Jews going back into Jerusalem and creating the foundation for the end times. And anyway, this is what the Archbishop of Canterbury, this guy Maitland, discovered. They had these things called the Aylesbury Conferences from 1826 until like 1828. And this is where you had in these big castles in England, a bunch of the leading grand strategists, including Thomas Carlyle, who's a high-level occultist, organize a new ideology that would infest Christianity in various branches of Christianity that would bring in what became known as premillennial dispensationalism. And this is where in 1830, one of those attendees created the there are many different subsects, spin-off, splinter groups of Christianity at that time in England and also in the Americas. That was so you had a high level splintering and cultification of Christianity into subgroups. It was already happening, but it happened it like hyperbolically accelerated. Right. And so among those was the grouping of the Plymouth Brethren, which Darby was a leading member of the Exclusive Brethren, the inner club within it that had a special teaching for the inner elite. And that is the origin. He basically interpreted the books of Thessalonians, where, Paul is writing to the people at the Thessalonians, describing, a situation where they will meet Jesus and, at a certain point. And he interpreted that as the rapture. So that's like, he created the secret rapture as his interpretation. And he started imposing these Kabbalistic ideas of a numerological sort of like tempering of world history around millennial dispensations, so that God has different character traits every 1,000 years. So there's sort of like a different schizophrenic quality of God's will that is expressed in the rules of that age. So the rules of Moses were a different set of rules. Like God had a different character than he did in the age of, Christ and after. And now we're getting ready to go into the new millennium, at which, you'll have the Christ return. But that also will coincide with a period of tribulation, hell on earth. Before that, the good people will disappear in rapture. Again, the Darby interpretation was very specific and had very geopolitical effects that were the desired outcome. Darby was also very closely aligned with another guy who was a grand strategist named the Lord Salisbury. What's his real name? Lord Salisbury is read my book. I forgot his actual birth name.
Yes,
it's in my. Oh, I'll just pull it up here. Lord Salisbury is I got a picture of him as well, so I might as well just pull it up. This is him right here. Okay,
we found it.
Yeah. Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper, that's him. And he's the founder of modern Zionism. So even though he didn't like the Jews, he was of the belief that it was the responsibility of good Christians to proselytize those Jews living in Russia and Eastern Europe, especially where there's a preponderance, and convince them to go and live in the desert. What these guys wanted explicitly in their writings, and especially a leading Plymouth Brethren friend of Darby who wrote the most on this guy, George Pember, was to have the Jews do what Ribera had called for, which is create an environment where the Antichrist will emerge in order to then self-destruct and usher in the end times, and a new age would then somehow magically self-organize. I don't know. And this is actually, you and I had a conversation a few months ago about my work on Jack the Ripper, which also plays into this. And the Jack the Ripper, the guy who was overseeing.
That's in volume 3, but it's related to this, right?
Yeah, it's all kind of, they're all three. That's why I had to release them as 3, because the story kind of just dovetails each other.
Yes.
And all kind of ends at the creation of the New Age counterculture baby boomers. That all 3 sort of end with that. And that was sort of the creation of the basis of the Crowleyite, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, new type of age of Horus, was what was done to the baby boomers as being like a Dionysian new ethos that would reject the principles of Christian values in favor of a new type of hyper hedonistic ethos that would be centered on the me instead of like the other. And what normal, healthy, happy human beings learn how to think about more than themselves is my kids, my humanity that I'm a part of, that gives me pleasure. They didn't make that leap by design. So the guy here is who played a role in protecting the Jack the Ripper operation or as a ritual murder is Charles Warren. That's his Quatuor Coronati Lodge. And that's Sir Walter Besant, the brother and handler of Annie Besant, who was the treasurer of the Quatuor Coronati. And that was sort of the Grand Research Lodge, Freemasonic Research Lodge, that formed the basis of the type of stuff that people might have been exposed to and not even realized it in the Indiana Jones movies, as also what animated the Nazis, who had their own New Templar order out of Wewelsburg Castle, which is part of volume 1 of my book series. And how Himmler, being a New Templar and a Wewelsburg Castle black magician, were directly inspired by the Quatuor Coronati Lodge when they created the Nazi Ahnenerbe, which is where they had their weird pseudoscientific expeditions to find the Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, the hollow earth out of Antarctica, Shambhala in Tibet, which would be this mystery set of caverns that might actually exist as far as caverns, representing a
a lot of evidence actually for there being caverns, but
huge network, probably going back many, many tens of thousands of years that are secretive, that probably do seem to have very satanic behavior and practices. I'm not saying these are demons, but I'm saying that there was something that infested the Tibetan variation of Buddhism, which the Nazis really liked, which they emulated as far as the skin grafting onto lamps in the using dead people in their concentration camps who had nice tattoos. They would graft skins. They learned that from the Tibetan lamas that were already doing that, not for aesthetics alone, but for a certain spiritualized religious reason. That does seem to be tied to something a little ancient that Charles Warren believed he was reviving when he was excavating Solomon's temple, that had to do with a Solomon that was not the Solomon of the Bible. And they have an idea of Solomon as a black magician, necromancer who's commanding, like they have a whole thing called the Testament. It's a grimoire called the Testament of Solomon, which it seems that was created in like the medieval like 13th, 12th century, maybe. Aleister Crowley used it for his upper and lower key, lesser key of Solomon for his rituals. But they have a spin that they rebranded Solomon as somebody who had a command over the hordes of Beelzebub, who served him when he
That's such a mouthful.
Beelzebub. Yeah, it is. And that they built the first temple were these demons who did it for him, these giants, these sons of the Nephilim. So that was what George Pember, the Plymouth Brethren guy, who, by the way, Crowley came out of the Plymouth Brethren and stated throughout his life that he still, even as a Satanist, still abided by the belief structure of John Nelson Darby. He said that even when he was an old man. He's like, of course I believe in John Nelson Darby. I just took the other side. But so they look at that zone, which is today the Dome of the Rock, the holy of holies of the Muslim world that was built on that location where there's a rock. They excavated that. They see that, which is also the area where Solomon's temple is supposed to be rebuilt, as a mass sacrifice zone, like an Aztec mass human sacrifice ritual zone, where they see the tunnels underneath the Dome of the Rock, which extend into the adjacent regions of Jerusalem.
Right.
And Charles Warren writes about this. Walter Besant writes about this. They see this, and that's the the cavern of size below the ritual, or the rock that supposedly Abraham was told to kill Isaac on top of, and then he was stopped by an angel who said, "What are you doing? Stop! Don't do that." And that's the rock that they say. Now, that's not actually the rock. The rock itself would probably be hundreds of feet lower. But the point is, that's a big rock, and that's the way that they treat the rock. It is that was the domain where Charles Warren believes mass, like in the thousands every day, of human sacrifices were done, and the blood would be sent down into that chamber, the chamber of size, as they call it. And that's since Islam took control of the area, it became a prayer enclave. There's a sub chamber below that, below the carpet that people were looking at. There's a sub chamber that very few people have been allowed to look at, but it has been diagrammed out by Charles Warren. And outside of that, coming out of that sub chamber below it, are these tunnels that are very big that go into the adjacent ground that he says is where the blood and refuse was sent to tie the people to the soil. So that's where I think the origins, as a cult, that's just, it comes out of. And the better Jews throughout history have been at war with this blood and soil interpretation of Judaism, which has been at the heart of a lot of very bad things, including what's going on today, where they've been trying, like Moses Mendelssohn of the 18th century was a major hero in my mind. I've read enough of his works that I love this guy, but he was a leading Jew who was saying, no, look, there's no evidence that this is a physical location. The idea of the chosen people is an idea which is a moral idea, that if you're going to be chosen, you have the greatest responsibility to be the most moral. The idea of the kingdom of
well, when they say the chosen people, I mean, I think what they were really saying is they were the people who were chosen to uphold the 10 Commandments.
That's the healthy interpretation. Every good Jew that's been a peacemaker has had that view. The ones that don't think like that and have the literalist view of something of a Nietzschean Übermenschen interpretation, like Nietzsche or Jabotinsky or Rabbi Kook. They go the other way and burn things down. So yeah. But yeah, you're right. That should be the healthy.
I mean, I do think when you think about like all the persecution, I mean, there's, obviously the occultists have their reason, I think, for scapegoating them. But then there's also, I mean, I don't know that you would hold the people who are going to hold a mirror up to you and say, these are the 10 Commandments. How are you doing? That there might be a bit of resentment for that. I mean, that's usually people who are not moral, who have not done a good job of holding the 10 Commandments. You might not be so fond of those that are putting that up in their face. So
no, they wouldn't. No, and that's why they have to kill a variety of Jewish leaders at times. Like Yitzhak Rabin, who in his younger years was an ideologue who did a lot of very reprehensible things against Arabs, but then he, unlike others, was able to self-examine and realize that he was on a path of forever wars, and he changed. And I don't know who organized him. It was probably a process, but he came out of that in 1992 with an obsession to changing his paradigm. And he said the future belongs to those who have the power to change their axioms. And he went out of his way to set up a more constructive dialogue with Yasser Arafat, and they came out of it with an agreed set of solutions for the Oslo Accords for a two-state solution. And it wasn't just based on a formal treaty; it was also based on on a proposition for economic development of both the Arab and Jewish territories that would need common things like water in the desert. You need more water, not Henry Kissinger. So how do you maximize water where it's lacking? Well, desalination. And they had big conferences about how do you set up the desalination plants and who's going to build it and how are Arabs and Jews going to start working together to green the deserts, to build roads and highways and build an economy together. And if you don't have that, the peace process couldn't work, which is why the World Bank had to sabotage all propositions to invest in those hard, practicable plans that would help the healing process begin. It would take many years, but it was possible. But they had to they said, no, the money's not going to be allowed to go, that we're going to give you can't go towards infrastructure. It can only go towards debt repayments, which kept things in a stasis. And where there's a vacuum, it's going to decay. And then they had to and it wasn't a Muslim, fundamentalist. It was a, radical Zionist who was deployed to murder Yitzhak Rabin. And those who championed his murder became the government around Benjamin Netanyahu. People like Smoltrik and Ben Gvir were all championing the murder of Yitzhak Rabin because he was the old school, non-ideological labor Zionist who was like, yeah, okay, we want a holy land, like we want this land, but at the same time, we don't want to grow into greater Israel. We want to just have a safe space.
Yes.
And we want economic.
And that is in the Bible. I mean, that element is in the Bible. So when, people are referencing it as a biblical, a biblical stance, that is there, but not, not the idea of a greater Babylon for sure.
Yeah, no, not a greater Babylon, right? But this is where also you had discussions. I found evidence back in 2009. The Russians were trying to mediate because there's still a lot of Jews living in Russia, and they were trying to mediate a peaceful resolution by bringing in certain rabbis, very influential rabbis, with imams to have discussions about the possibility of building Solomon's temple, which would satisfy certain ideas of the Bible, I suppose. Yeah. But at the same time, or maybe it's in the Talmud, I don't even know, frankly, where specifically it says the Jews should build Solomon's temple. I don't know what interpretation that is. But all that to say, there was a discussion that was a serious one about the idea that maybe building it could happen without blowing up the Dome of the Rock, because there's no agreed upon consensus on where specifically Solomon's temple was located. And the Temple Mount is a very big space.
Sure.
And so, why can't it be built next to the Holy of Holies mosque? Why does it have to be on that specific location where we don't even know if that was where the first one was? And so that's, again, like a creative way to reframe a problem which is otherwise unsolvable. Right. Is just like, why not? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you can't. So,
right.
And it would still satisfy the fanatics, like the really hardliners would still have to be somewhat satisfied by the fact that, well, it got built.
There's also, when you talk about, them cooperating, there are the, elements of Islam that believe that all Jews have to be killed. And so there's that too. So,
yeah. So that's so interesting as well, right? Because where does that branch, because that's Salafism. So the school of Salafist Islam comes out of the teachings of a certain occultist of the 19th century by the name of Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, who is this Persian occultist who was trying to act like he was Afghani, because Afghanistan was still a much more developed cultural hub of those days under the Ottoman Empire. But he wasn't. He was this Persian. It seems like he was a Persian pagan occultist, and actually a fellow traveler with Madame Blavatsky. And there's a book. Do I have it readily available here? That's him right there. And he's known as a chameleon character. And he would be able to just, on the one hand, that you're looking right there at his conservative imam persona.
Didn't he have masonry ties as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He was a member of the Rite of Memphis and Misraim. He was, right. Which is the Egyptian rite that was combined by Garibaldi in 1880. So he was an initiate there. He was also an initiate of the Brotherhood of Luxor, a Hermetic brotherhood, which it appears as though he was initiated around the exact same time in the same location in Cairo that Blavatsky was also initiated into the Brotherhood of, before she set up Theosophy. I think it's like 1870.
We did cover quite a bit of this with Leo Zagami. That's
one
of his books. Yep.
Oh, damn. I got to listen to that one. Okay, cool. Oh, I didn't know. Ha. Maybe I'll talk to that guy too. That's cool. So yeah, okay. So your audience then is initiated into the secret doctrine of Al-Afghani. Who, again, and he's got weird connections to the British Cairo office as on top of these mystical orders. So, but it would be weird. It's weird for people who should think about this, like how this guy who actually kind of despises Islam, he sees it as maybe a useful tool for social control, but he doesn't respect it. He's an occultist.
Right.
But that's his different diagrams of him and his different chameleon personas. Why would he then be the founder of a philosophy that became a school of thought that created and promoted a very rigid jihadist, inflexible interpretation of Islam, of how to read and interpret the very allegorical scriptures within the Quran that would generate a lot of, it didn't make people terrorists,
Right.
but let's just say it created a philosophical state of mind that was very conducive for churning out.
In some ways, a justification for it.
Well, yeah, exactly, right? And so this is what became the philosophical base that fed into the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood and the school of Wahhabism, again, which merged together the philosophy of Al-Wahhab, who was another very rigid, dogmatic, doctrinaire figure who seems to also be tied in certain ways to certain Masonic circles. So they created this school of thought that together were used to generate the secret society, or to produce the members who became leading officials around the Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah, there you go. Okay, yeah, pretty fast on the trigger there. Al-Wahhab. And the base of Wahhabism, which again by itself isn't necessarily one-to-one you're going to become a terrorist. You could still be a good person who's a Wahhabi, who has a Wahhabi philosophy. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it means that if you're a good person, it's because you've held on to certain human common sense attributes that you're not going to let go of in favor of certain things that might be there in the scriptures that you will choose to not pay too much heed to. So you will emphasize the good value points, and like any Christian does, right? So you got Christians who can be radicalized, and they will look at things that the Templars were looking at to justify an interpretation of pick up the sword and go, Christ advocates us to, somehow they spun it to interpret the idea of picking up the sword to your parents and the worldly affairs, and to, I don't know, and to,
well, or
it was
just
weird.
Yeah,
the idea of forgiving and loving your enemies was not really, that was de-emphasized.
That's or those that, it looks like a lot of those surrounding Trump do seem to want to revive the Crusades 2.0.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that kind of mentality and mindset, which doesn't seem all that Christian to me. And there's there's lots of factions of this with the neo-integralists, who are also surrounding Trump. J.D. Vance very much is a neo-integralist. You mentioned Pete Hegseth is he has the tattoo of the Holy Knights of Sepulchre. I probably mispronounced that, but he does. Then who else is there? There seem to be a bunch, and then there's
Trump's appointee to the UN as well believes that that's the Kingdom of Jerusalem flag. Yeah, she believes that that the Israelis must have full control of the West Bank as well as Gaza as their divine covenant. She said that openly before they approved her position at the UN. So yeah, there's a bunch of these freaks who are.
And then there's a bunch of them who are they claim to be Christian, but they want Christian nationalism, which really doesn't seem very Christian, when you really break it down. But it's definitely not American.
No, a lot of them, it seems like a lot of them are the followers of people like Leo Strauss and René Girard. Yeah. René Girard is another big one who was a contemporary of Strauss and who inspired a lot of these creatures.
Well, a bunch of them say that they're Straussian, and they say they're Heideggerian. Really? Yeah. You're going to openly say this.
Yeah, it's a leading Nazi philosopher, right? And Heidegger was also utilizing a lot of the elements from Carl Jung's archetypical interpretation of
Heidegger's a Gnostic. He is.
I
would argue all these existentialists are. I know people don't like when I use the umbrella Gnostic term, but I kind of use it as I've coined it as little G Gnosticism. I don't know what you think of that, but because there's the official Gnostics in the first century, right? But then I feel like a lot of these, when you your whole book, when you outline the mystery cults, there's an element of Gnostic through line that seems to be in all of it.
Well, how do you define it when you talk to these people? Like, how are you explaining the term Gnosticism? Yeah, like what do you tell them?
When I talk about like little G Gnosticism, some of the key themes that I see are this notion of man becoming, right? He's so this is like what the Illuminati were. They were the order of the perfectibilists because they believe that they could be perfected, which is essentially the cornerstone of that is that they believe that it's a pantheistic belief that there's the gods within them and they are becoming they're realizing their potential as gods. I see that as kind of a through line in all of these various, cult beliefs. This idea that there's a, technically the term's an ignorant demiurge, but essentially he was not benevolent because he withheld the gnosis from them. And then, the gnosis that only the light bearer could bring to them and illuminate them so that they could be all that they could be, which is, the God, so that they themselves are God. And then the other through line that I see in all, I guess there are a few more. The seven rays, this is, Alice Bailey. The other through line that I see is that there is this kind of it depends because there are different sects of it, but like that there is like a statehood that's God, or for some of them it's the Gaia, it's the Earth God, but it's still controlled by these, these elevated groups who somehow have consciously evolved, and they have the gnosis, and so therefore, they should rule over everybody else. There are different variations of that, but it's it's kind of the same thing over and over again. And then the lastly is just that they all seem to think you have to have some sort of a spiritual experience to get you there, and usually that involves drugs to transcend, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it involves incredibly horrific traumatic events in order to transcend. But
yeah,
I don't know.
No, I think you're. I typically will agree to what you just said, and for the most part, because I mean the nuance comes in where they will be successful, like we've talked about, because they use outwardly truthful things, right? Evolution by choice, not by chance. Yeah, okay, yeah. It's like they'll say things which on the surface may or may not be bad, right? Like it may be good or bad on the surface, light in life, or even what she said. I could be, if I'm a moral person, I can interpret that from the standpoint that. Yeah,
okay,
like
so I'll add one more caveat to the whole little G Gnosticism is that they have when we talk about the inner circles, right? The rings on ring structure. So the inner core are initiated and they speak the esoteric language because they've been initiated. They know what the vernacular really means. They have the gnosis because they've been initiated. And then there's the exoteric messaging. And usually the esoteric messaging is founded on a kernel of truth. I mean, otherwise you would just dismiss it altogether and nobody would take them seriously. But because it seems like they know so much and they have all the answers and there is a hook, and the hook is, founded on some merit that you are convinced. I mean, who doesn't want to let the plan of love and light work out?
Yeah, I want that. Yeah, give me that. Yeah, I'm all in. What can go wrong? I think that's and what would be the capital G gnosis then, or Gnostics for you?
Oh, that's the like heretics in the first century, who they were considered the Christian heretics, the official Gnostics. Like that's to me, that's a big G. But not everybody subscribed to that, framework. I mean, there are parallels, I think. I mean, if you read Blavatsky, she kind of says the same thing, that she talks about how Satan and Lucifer are the real gods. But she says that we all came from source, which is I think the ancients would have called it the undifferentiated all. And through the different cults that you've outlined, I think that the Gaia is there just in different essences in each of the, whether it's the Lucinian or the, they all had like some variation of this Gaia worship. So it's not, but it's, so I just but of course, there are nuanced differences between what the official, capital G Gnosticism. The thing is, they all claim to have, and they do a lot of this. Like, we'll take the Theosophists, for instance, because they did so much infighting, and and we've talked about this before. That a lot of it was looks like it was kind of staged, and it did turn out to be. But it's not just them. They all seem to do this, where they have we're different. We don't agree with them. And so therefore, you get caught up in the nuances when the through line is the same. They're still all occultists.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
yeah. Well, whether it's the Ariosophists and you get the Ariosophists breaking off and debating the Anthroposophists, and the Anthroposophists are fighting the Theosophists, and the Theosophists have a sub branch of the American Theosophists, and they're fighting each other.
And even Bailey and Besant and Blavatsky are all fighting each other, but it wasn't a battle. I mean, it's like it's like saying the Nazis were against the communists. It's not that Hitler had a problem with the foundation of Marxism. He had a problem with the battle for power. He wanted to rule the world, not Stalin.
Well, people also champion Hitler because, certain Freemasonry it suffered under Hitler. And it's like, okay, it doesn't mean that he was anti-secret society or occultism. It just meant that he wanted his particular secret society cult of New Templars and Arminists to come out as the dominant mystery cult, and didn't want competition. It was just a consolidation of one black magician's circle over a few others that were vying for influence, and he got political power and crushed the other ones. But doesn't make him a good guy by any means. So, in the sense of in my reading, so I've been reading a lot increasingly of some of these early church fathers, like this guy Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, who
I need to read those. Yeah.
Oh, they're good. Yeah, his Against Heresies is so good. And what I love about him, because he's like 3rd century, and he's playing a big role in calling out the Gnostic infiltration of Christianity early on. And in this eminently readable book, or it's a series of books, but it's all contained in one thing. He's like showcasing the magic tricks that they use, because just like the Blavatsky was discovered, doing all sorts of stage magic to try to make teacups and letters from Master Moria appear out of thin air, and ectoplasm protrude out of orifices when they were doing seances. Like, all of those magic tricks were not necessarily new. There were some new innovations when they applied electricity and plasma to Roentgen rays for X-rays. So they could they would use certain tech that was being discovered to amplify the ritual experience for idiots, superstitious idiots who would go see one of their star mediums at one of the Theosophy centers or one of the other spiritualist centers, to heighten the effect. But that was also being done, as Saint Irenaeus points out. He describes how they could cast an illusion of the night stars in the roof of somebody's house. He goes through how they could make almost what seems to be like a almost holographic projection using mirrors of an apparition to amplify people's devotion, to give them money for what, telling them what the gods or a dead person from their family wants them to do. So he's debunking these magic tricks, which I love, because I'm seeing that that's what Edgar Allan Poe is doing. That's what Houdini is doing. So he's debunking the tricks, but he's also making, as clear as I've ever seen it, the various spins on sacred myths of each of the dominant schools of Gnostics of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, which he goes through, the Valentinian school, the Balsides school, the Marcion school, the Mani school of the followers of Mani that created the Manichaean doctrine.
I'm seeing so much of that.
Oh yeah, the light darkness coexistence, the evil good needs evil, blah blah blah. But so all of them have these same, as you said, these invariants that are there in all of their systems, despite them disputing and breaking off. And there's like dozens, because every time you achieve gnosis and you've gone through the whole rite of initiation, now you're God. Well, now all of a sudden you have the authority to create new cults because your word now becomes God. And so people have to now abide by your charisma, which is where it got really out of hand. And this is where the early church fathers were like, we're being infiltrated and being destroyed from the inside. And they're taking like a nominally Christian label that they're putting on themselves, and then rewriting the books of the gospel and creating new books that were written, as far as we could see, the Nag Hammadi and Dead Sea, well, especially the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which Carl Jung played a direct role in promulgating and translating.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're just found by a dude in a cave after World War II. I think that was planted there as part of a coming out party. But all of that, those scrolls were already known for 2,000 years and were the basis of the creation of the Templars, the Knights Hospitaller, all of these esoteric orders. But all that to say, the earliest evidence we have of any of these was like 2nd century earliest. And so they would do things like, whether it's the Book of Mary Magdalene, the secret teachings, the secret Gospel of John, all of these secret texts of Mind Perfect Thunder, were the Book of Thomas. They were all taking the general cosmology and initiatory system that was already there within the temple of Isis and Serapis and Attis and Cybele and Mithra. They would take these already existent cosmologies, initiatory practices, and then rebranded it with a slightly more, Christian veneer.
Yes.
And then had a secret doctrine of Jesus, which was, they all believed that Jesus was actually the Lucifer avatar. So that's why they call them the Sethian Gospels. Like Set is the spirit demon that manifested in the serpent, that manifested in the figure of Christ, who actually had an outward teaching structure promoting morality for the stupid people, but for his favored initiates, especially Mary Magdalene, his sacred whore, and as they think of it, and John, which is where another secret society took its name based on the secret teachings of John. They had a special secret doctrine for the inner elite that was passed down orally, not written, except in the Nag Hammadis. And that involved doing things that would be ultimately practices that would be morally reprehensible, but necessary to unite back to Yaldabaoth, or to transcend Yaldabaoth, actually, not unite, because Yaldabaoth in their mind, and I know this because of this guy, as well as Blavatsky, who writes about this and says that Yaldabaoth is the proper way to think about the evil demiurge,
right?
Is the God of the Old Testament, and that God, which stupid people believe is God, actually is this demiurge that was the sexualized mutant of Sophia that hated men, that procreated with herself. That's their idea of what Sophia is. It's a very different idea from the higher Greeks, and through her hate.
I feel like in a way they've kind of merged it, because Sophia means wisdom, and so they projected that onto their vision of Sophia.
And that's how they do with like Gnostic, as far as like the word means like literally a type of knowledge that is not susceptible to logic,
right?
Which is not intrinsically a wrong thing. If you think about the limits of knowledge when it comes to making a real discovery, you can't simply use logic alone. You also have to have a certain love that allows you to leap over through a eureka experience into a discovery hypothesis that's generative. Like you have to generate a hypothesis that solves a paradox. So this is stuff that computers can do, logic, they can do better than us, but they can't do that other thing that only humans can do through inspiration, enthusiasm, love, these powers.
Curiosity.
Curiosity. They don't have those things, so they can't do the full-blown true gnosis in that sense. So that's like the healthy gnosis in my mind. Is that involves creative reason, whereas theirs involves irrationalism, or animated maybe by the passion of Eros. But that Eros has to be combined by its opposite, which is something like, so they take pain and pleasure and they find ways to merge them together, the sacred and the profane. and find experiences that you can give to your initiates that merge them together, right? Sexual energy of the male and the female united together, promote androgyny in that sense within different cults like Sabellinatus, where you got to cut off your schlong at a certain point and learn to have sex as a woman does. But it's this, that was the hierophants of the Sabellinatus cult. So they need to do that. And even in the cult of Mithra, there's a lot of evidence that they had to promote a lot of gay sex at the second stage before you go on even higher to bestialization at the third gate. Before you can raise to become enlightened, right? And then you can make your own cult. So these guys, these early solid church fathers who were like the ones organizing the Council of Nicaea were like pretty good. Hans Jonas, that's a great book, by the way, super useful. He's the student of Heidegger. That book is really useful. So, and he also, so I don't want to get too off topic, but so there was, I don't know of any Gnostic school of actual persecuted Christians. Like I know of the persecuted Christians. That was a lot of them that Nero tried to kill, scorched earth. Yeah. But those weren't the Gnostics that I could tell. The Gnostics that tended to get that were shut down after the Council of Nicaea were, in my evidence, what I've seen, I haven't seen the good ones. If there are the good schools of Gnostics, I'm still waiting to see what they are because I haven't found them yet.
I keep hearing there are, but in my interpretation of the ones who are people who really are just, it's kind of like the New Age people who are just deceived. They might be really good people and they're just
lower order, people who maybe just didn't know what they were getting into. Yeah, exactly. Maybe, but okay. But otherwise, I see like kind of like what we were talking about with Plato too early in a previous show that we did together, is that, you have what Plato is, the method Plato is promoting within his dialogues as a process of a verb-based orientation of the universe that's based on like inquiry, awakening passion for truth, looking for paradoxes, where do arguments break down when they're pressed on reality. And then you've got the literalist noun-based view of the universe of his enemies who try to act Platonic and try to claim his title as his own, but they're just taking a literalist, again, noun-based, rigid interpretation of Platonism to use it as a model for social control, not realizing that Plato was actually exposing the entire underpinnings of oligarchical systems. But then Plato gets the bad name because there's a secret doctrine that apparently was passed down from Plato to his students through Aristotle to our present, including Blavatsky, who lays claim to being a Neoplatonist, because she's part of the secret doctrine that received his, Neoplatonic gnosis. And that's the same thing. What they do with Christ is they're like, yeah, Jesus had a secret doctrine. Oh yeah, Moses, that's the Kabbalists. They're like, yeah, he had a secret oral doctrine only for the initiated. Muhammad, oh yeah, he had the stuff that he wrote down, but then he had his true secret doctrine for the initiated.
I see.
And that's where you see a bit, right? And this is where they all get along together. And this is where you have like Albana and Albana. You got Al-Afghani and Blavatsky all laughing together with their, Eliphas Levi and his, weird Kabbalist Zionist counterparts. They're all having a joke, acting like they're Jewish or, well, Blavatsky didn't act Christian, but there were Theosophists who did, who were still having a joke at the stupid Christians who were not initiated, going along with the designs that they had created to create a mass calamity in some weird, again, it always comes back to this obsession with resetting civilization and restoring ancient pagan mystery cults that normalize human sacrifice and merge sacred and profane. That's what they want. And there's like, they all agree on that. And however they get there, they work it out. But that's sort of the thing that they all agree on.
And I feel I feel like this was really solidified reading your work, but I feel like the ancient mysteries, they're not all that different from the, what I call little g Gnostics, or even the capital G Gnostics, except that they put it under the veneer of Christianity. That was the way that they infiltrated, whereas Christianity wasn't around for the ancient mystery cults.
Yeah, and Christianity, one of its innovations that was so revolutionary was that it got rid of the mysteries, and it said, no, the mysteries are for everyone. It's not to be an initiatory. It's that, there's the revelation is that God loves you, that, you know, he gave himself in the form of a concept of God in the flesh as a testament to cleanse us of the sins that we have. And I'm not a Christian fundamentalist, but I get it from the standpoint of the epistemological battle. I see the value in that idea of being able to let go of your shame, of your sin-ridden self that was a part of unnatural systems that you were born into, that encourage, you know, and that there's a need to find a way to do sort of a healthy transformation into something more noble, which it helps a lot to have the idea of a God that loves you so much that they're willing to, like, you know, have Christ die on the cross for you. That he loves you willingly, was willing, and that you don't have to do that anymore. Like, that was the whole point, I think, as far as the battle over ideas of the intervention of the story of Abraham. It was like, that's the end of human sacrifice. Right. On the surface, it might be a horrifying story that God would be actually desirous of a child sacrifice. That doesn't seem like a God I can identify with. Right. But then when you reframe it and look at it in the world that had human sacrifices as so prevalent that it was in the days that it was written, then that you can see that that's actually, oh, that's an unfortunate picture right there, eh? Holy shit. Damn. That's like a medieval, like, child sacrifice going on, eh? That's nuts. Oof. So that was really discombobulated.
It was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. That was heavy. I feel like I watched a snuff film just now. But yeah, you got the idea though of a God which is reasonable, has certain attributes that we can find within ourselves. Like we have a role model in the figure of a perfect Christ as an idea, which as a blueprint gives us something to aim at. Like when we're having trouble, difficulty making tough decisions morally, there's the idea of, like, you know, okay, what would Christ actually do in this type of situation? And that idea, I think, is what the founding fathers had in mind when they were thinking about a healthy version of perfectibility of the individual. Based not upon, like, I'm going to be the perfect
I don't
God.
think they thought of a perfectibility. I mean, I think they rejected that notion, but it was the idea of aspirational morality, an idea that man could improve. I think those two things are different. I don't think that there's nothing in the reading that I've done on the founding fathers that indicates that they thought man could be perfected. I think they actually thought precisely the opposite, but they thought that man could improve and aspire to be moral. And then, in fact, you needed that in order to have self-governance.
But what about the language of to form a more perfect union? What does that mean?
I don't interpret that man could become perfected. I think.
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying become better. I just meant
definitely better. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, because when you really look at what they were rejecting and what they were coming out of, I mean, coming out where we talked about the French Revolution, one of our previous. I think, you know, they're watching that. I mean, they're watching and that idea was that man could be perfected, which is very different than the idea that man can improve and that man, you know, could
no, it comes down to a battle of ideas, I guess, because the word itself, like, for my mind, if you have, like, perfectibility, if you have an idea of a crystallized universe where that endpoint is physically possible, like a noun-based universe, then you're striving at an actual idea of a future self which is perfect, devoid of any problems, which is delusional.
But
if I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of an entire universe which is constantly animated by creativity, growth, improvement everywhere, and I'm an expression of it, then there's no endpoint. Like, in that standpoint, the idea of becoming a better person, aiming towards, like, in a loose idea, you know, like they say, you can never draw the perfect square, but you can imagine the perfect square and its attributes, but you can never draw that perfect square in the physical universe. It's always going to be imperfect. And you can make a more perfect square, but it'll always be imperfect. But you know, and you can,
like you can never quite reach it.
Yeah, it's like an asymptotic thing, right? Yeah. But the idea is perfect as a concept. Right. So you got these two states of being and becoming. And if the being state can help you as an intellectual guide, but without deluding yourself into thinking that, okay, now I can finally actualize in the physical reality that. And the oligarchy doesn't have that thing. They're obsessed with actual immortality, right? The immortalization of the flesh. They're obsessed with that. So they want that's their messed up idea, the perfect ejaculation or whatever. Like they just got like, which is how they think of their spirituality, is just sex.
Yeah.
Pure eros, like you said, the cosmoerotic humanism stuff, right?
Yeah, he's got his Eros mystery schools, and he's now he's working with Aubrey Marcus, and I think they're, I don't know, I don't remember where they're going now, but they're actually like recruiting people to do an intensive of sorts. Yeah,
and it seems like in that type of structure, you have an inner teaching order that they will select people out of who will probably find a way to get sexual experiences out of horrific things.
Yes.
It seems like that's what I've noticed as a theme amongst this sort of thing.
Well, to bring this, I guess, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, and this is in your second book when you talk about and it's very relevant right now with what's going on with Trump, is kind of the technocracy. I guess my first question is, and I don't know if you really address this part in the book, so I'll just ask you this, and then we'll kind of cover that aspect. But would you consider like the technocrats and the transhumanists to be in that same vein of I guess, I don't know. I kind of do put them under that same umbrella because it just seems like through this merging with machines that they think that they're going to become gods, as you were talking about the immortality. Yeah,
it's the same thing. Yeah, it's a direct outgrowth, and that's volume 2.
volume 2.
Yeah, it's the Technocracy Inc. movement is tied on several points of connection to a Luciferian operation baked into John Dewey's New School,
right,
as well as another group that was called Social Credit under this.
That blew my mind. I did not know about that. The social credit. Oh, that blew my mind because. Right, what's going on when you look at the AI World Society, and they have a social value reward system, right? And they say it's different than China's social credit because it's meritocratic, and I mean it really isn't. It's a social credit system, but they use different terminology to incentivize you to opt into it, and so it really looks like they're using that as a model to build this AI world society. But the difference is that now you're going to be, opting in is what it looks like, because you're going to want to get these rewards rather than it being a top-down structure where the government tells you, or the AI government. But to see that was coming out of this Technocracy Inc., this term, social credit, was, that was mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, it was actually, so this guy, Major C.H. Douglas, he was a follower of Gurdjieff and also Ehret. So he's a British.
Phrygia?
Huh?
Did you say Phrygia?
No, I said Gurdjieff.
Oh, Gurdjieff. Okay.
Yeah, Eastern European occultist.
Okay. Okay. Good.
And Gurdjieff had an assistant by the name of A.J. Ehret, another British occultist who ran this New Age magazine, and he's the one who coined the term social credit specifically for Douglas, who popularized it. But it was actually in its construction, if you look at it, it was a relatively underdefined by design political economic system design that got really popular during the Great Depression, and he even marketed it to Hitler. He was writing letters to Hitler when it seemed as though Hitler was favorable to the idea that would be the governing policy if Nazi Germany had succeeded in the war, because it was actually, strangely enough, a dual anarcho-syndicalist bottom-up system that looks very similar to the Austrian school that was also being pumped out around the same time by British Fabian channels, ironically, around John. So you had these weird top-down, like, Fabian socialist networks simultaneously working very frequently with seemingly bottom-up anarcho.
What I'm doing now.
Yeah, very similar. When you hear like Elon Musk that I cite in my books, saying anarcho-syndicalism for the win at the same time that he's saying he's a socialist. Or you hear Bertrand Russell also doing a giant defense of anarcho-syndicalism in 1919 at the same time as he's saying that he's for one world government. It's not a contradiction. They're necessary parts of the same thing, because if you want the top-down world government controls to actually be viable, you have to create a system of appearance on the bottom for people to think that their freedom is their ability to eat local, to have little town halls based on whether the stop sign is going to go there or there, and have like a little mini bit of localized freedom, but that'll be self-contained in a little crystal out of which they can't have an opinion that matters to change the broader system or to affect a city that's outside of their little jurisdiction of their 15-minute city zone. So you have to have something that will satisfy, on the one hand, making people's minds as microfied as possible, self-absorbed as possible, so that they only think of themselves.
You have this quote in your book as well.
Yeah. That's a crazy big quote. And it's totally... It runs right through organically with his promotion of libertarianism. It's the same reason why Klaus Schwab, is saying openly, like, the only threat to the New World Order and the Great Reset is libertarianism. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you clearly want people to jump into libertarianism. Like, nobody talks like that. You're creating a false dichotomy that, and then you have Millet as this, persona who's like created to create a bit of a rah-rah hysteria, but what he's doing is just massively privatizing the entire economy, the way we saw in all Latin American countries in the 1970s under the CIA, was mass privatizing of everything that was otherwise not private, which only benefits those international financiers who run the corporations, who manage Bilderberg, who gobble up things for pennies on the dollar. And it might create an illusion of economic progress in Argentina, because you're you're getting rid of regulations and you're saying, our industrial output is increasing. Well, not really, because it's only increasing for raw material exports, but all of the factories and manufacturing that Argentina, they were never allowed to have that much to begin with, but what little they have has been crushed in favor of turning resources into money for export markets, but not actually having a viable full spectrum economy, which they need to have if they're going to be a true nation state. So it gives an appearance of having a lot of money immediately, but you're destroying your future ability, as we've all done under globalization, to stand on your own 2 feet. So it's fake wealth being created. And then you have like Bitcoin cities. What is this? Vitalia? Oh yeah. Bitcoin freedom cities being pushed left and right as little micro liberty nations that are just tax havens or like money laundering centers, ultimately for a new elite. Very water world.
This is it is. Well, and that's Peter Thiel's initial concept of seasteading, right? He transitioned from seasteading to the network state because seasteading didn't take off. But
Prospera. Yeah, exactly. It's all little micro might makes right, little gangs that are going to come out dominant over little regions. And it looks all nice and surface on the website, but then in practice, it's going to be a very different thing, as it always is. So the social credit thing is what it got some political hold in Canada in the 30s, in BC and Alberta. But I guess the thing that it didn't get a hold in Saskatchewan, which is what Elon Musk's grandpa, Joshua Haldeman, he was based in Saskatchewan at that time. And this is like after he got arrested for running this fascist Technocracy Inc. party pushing for a technate. He got arrested because part of your mandate is to overthrow the government and install scientific managers over a technate. So it wasn't compatible with any type of semblance of democracy. So he got arrested, and that's them with their little monad symbol, like the Hitlers had the swastika, they have the monad. But so your original question was the Gnostics to the technocracy and transhumanists. So all of this is the direct, as far as I could see it, the direct consequence of Madame Blavatsky's root race theology that was also implanted into the Nazis through the Ariosophists, which is that you could presume that all of human civilization has been moving through, and there will only be somehow 7 stages from of root races. We currently now being at the end of a 5th root race, she says. Right. Which again, there's no actual hard evidence for any of this. It's all made up. But
and when I posted all the stages, that was Lord EM censored me and like banned my post.
Who censored you?
Lord Elon.
Oh, Lord Elon, he actually censored that?
Yeah, I sent it to you. It was like that whole list of like the different stages of the root races.
Yeah. Right. I totally fucking blanked out on that.
He hid the post and said that, this was a violation of terms and conditions. I think it's
right. Yeah, I totally forgot. That's hilarious, eh?
Yeah.
So yeah, you touched a nerve.
Apparently.
Yeah.
That didn't go well.
So yeah, these guys. Yeah, I don't want to get into the externalization. I know you guys talked a lot about that, but that's a big one. It touches on this, of course.
Yeah.
But so she was calling for the idea that the next root race would emerge in California,
right?
And that she had a certain spin that it would be an Aryan Teutonic racial stock that would be the seed, all of which has been overseen by the Atlantean giants, the Nephilim, Atlanteans. There's a bit of a hybrid that sort of seeded these root races, and it's natural that that the inferior root races or the inferior subraces, because each whatever stage has like 7 substages of this total 7 stages, I think, or something, that we exterminate. So if you're a more advanced root rate or race, then you must exterminate the previous sub-races if you're more advanced. So it's just your natural response. That's why a lot of these followers of this school of thought believe that they had to fully just exterminate the Native Americans because they were just part of an earlier sub-race. And we had to this is what the Smithsonian...
Well, that was our argument about the Jews, too. They were an animalistic, lower race, and they had to be exterminated.
The black Aboriginals of New Zealand and Australia had to be exterminated. It wasn't moral, but it wasn't bad or good. It was just necessary, So let's get this weird detachment from any value judgments. It's all just cold necessity, which is kind of
it's just the evolution of the cosmos. I mean,
yeah, just go with the flow, man. Yeah. And yeah, that would be so that 6th root race that was going to be seated in California was at the heart, I think, of the organization of the inner ideological sanctum of the Technocracy Inc. crowd, as well as what became the Silicon Valley eugenics or neo-eugenics transhumanist crowd that all have this idea that they were obsessed with of invoking a new breed of life that had never existed based on a merger, a spiritualization of the flesh and a spiritualization of matter in a weird, unnatural way that involved merging silicon and flesh into some new stock of life. That would be the seat of the 6th root race. And I guess the 7th root race is going to be some in 30,000 years, or I don't know when. What is it? Future race must conquer the Samadhi. Yeah, where everybody's now officially God, right? At that moment.
I think they said it was, maybe I'm confusing it. I thought it was going to be at the region of Australia where the 7th race.
Oh, did they get down? they're that specific? Okay.
I think that's what they said, yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm not sure if it was the 7th. I might have gotten my order wrong, but I think it was the 7th that was.
Good for that. Wow, there's such foresight, eh? It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, their ascended masters give them psychic powers.
Right. God bless Master Moria and Kutumia. It's like, which, I mean, God, the fact that people take this seriously, even though Blavatsky got caught making so much of this up, and they still take it seriously. It's just, yeah. It's weird.
I mean, I think it's interesting that this $500 billion, it's called Stargate, right?
Yeah.
And what wasn't the Project Stargate out of the CIA? It was all about remote viewing, which is what
Yeah, and I think that when you look at the origins of the Pleiades interpretation or spin that they put on, there's certain subgroups within the UFO cults. There's so many UFO cults,
Right.
but among some of the more dominant ones, like what's his name? Blanking all of a sudden. The German guy with a funny name. It's okay. It'll come later.
Okay.
I got it here. This is actually a really good book called 50 Shades of Grey Aliens. By, you might want to interview this guy, Ken Ami. It's called Consideration of Aliens, UFOs, Abductees, Channeling, and More. Very, very useful book. And in it, he goes through just the origins of the Pleiades thesis that these aliens actually come from specifically that location, that constellation. And the only way you could then possibly imagine in physical communication would either be, one would be telepathy, that maybe they don't move physically. Maybe they communicate in light speed or beyond light speed, just through the mind of certain gifted people, gifted mediums. Very similar logic that was given to those who could be channelers for Courtenay or the other demon spirits, right? Is specifically gifted mediums, often people who have been through trauma-based mind control or trauma in some form that helps them become schizophrenic and thus, more inclined to transmit authentic otherness from the beyond, So drugs and schizophrenia help. Trauma helps at disassociations, it seems. And so the Stargate thing,
MK Ultra was all about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I do think that they chose the Stargate idea that later became a movie based on that idea of clairvoyance to other star systems as one of the elements. It wasn't just purely geopolitical. Let's look at what the Kremlin is doing in their war room, which is how they marketed it for, I guess, some of the military idiots. But I think they actually, the people like Hal Puthoff and other Scientologists who were overseeing it, like Ingo Swann and what's his other name? And there's a whole bunch of these high-level Scientologists overseeing that program that our buddy Matthew Crawford had firsthand knowledge of. A lot of abuse of children.
Casey.
The Edgar Casey cult was a big part of that. The ARC, whatever ARC it is, or anyway. But
Association for something research. ARE.
Sex, rocket science, and Satanism meet NASA's real hidden figures. That sounds like a good article. I'd like to read that article.
Okay, we'll see if we can save that and send it.
Yes, please, Houston, do that. So, I think that they always had that idea at the end. It's really, baked into these new neo-theosophical cultists who have been managing the new big UFO disclosure movement, is just reviving all of the techniques of trickery. You're living in a magic trick in so many ways. And it doesn't matter how many times you prove that a certain story around UFO contacts or UFO sightings has been a forgery. It doesn't matter. They'll always come up with other explanations, but that one might be true. Okay, we had a bunch of CIA operatives lying to us about Roswell or the alien anatomy, that they pulled out of the Roswell crash. Maybe that was a hoax. They'll admit that when you prove it, but they're like, oh, but this other thing might be true. Majestic 12, that's true.
Right.
It's like it's the same type of like mental backflips to avoid dealing with the fundamental problem in thinking when people heard that Blavatsky was using tricks and it was proven, and they're like, oh, but maybe that 3% of, maybe she was lying about 97%, but that 3% they couldn't account for scientifically, maybe that 3% is the authentic stuff. And she had to tell lies for stupid people to believe in the higher truths that they were too stupid to understand, because they still think that they can use reason, and the higher truths are beyond reason. They're Gnostic. So you have to do trickery for the, but it's for their good,
I hear this all the time. Yes. Isn't that the whole justification for classified documentation of military research?
Yes. Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
Totally.
I know I've kept you for quite a while. I have another question for you, and this is pertaining to, we don't have to go into all of it because you outlined it's quite extensive in your first book. But what are your thoughts on the field of psychology? Like, do you think, because you outline Jung's being a Gnostic and his ties to Mithraism. So do you think that it was essentially, and I think this is, I'll just tell you my thought on this, why it's so relevant today, is because I feel like they were studying that. I don't really feel like it was about, like a legitimate kind of a science. I'm not saying that psychology has never helped anyone. My mom actually happens to be a psychologist. Like I know there are people who've been helped through it, but or as a result of it. But it seemed more like they're studying the result of like esoteric practices and belief systems and ways that they can collect data in order to then, it's feedback loop. And the reason I think that is so relevant today with what's looks like a looming technocracy is because you have the whole field of cybernetics, which kind of overlapped at that time, very relevant to MK Ultra, kind of a convergence of the two, right? The cybernetic studies and then the psychological studies. They were converging, and now the Macy conferences have actually, they call it the new Macy's. So they're actually reviving these cybernetic conferences. And it seems like they are reviving it because all of the, all the technocratic kind of, all the technology that's developing today. So you have kind of these visions, these ideas, and then you have the technology that actually catches up with them. And now we're in a position where they could really use technology to create some sort of collective, they call it collective intelligence now, but of course, Jung called it collective unconscious. Teilhard de Chardin, I know I mispronounce it, Chardin. I can never say his name correctly. That's not trying to be insulting. But he thought of a noosphere, and that would result in an omega point that seems to be similar to Kurzweil's singularity. So they have different terminology, but it all seems to be related. Yeah.
Yep, it does. Well, I got a little quote from Elon as well that bothered me, where he says last year, if successful, X will evolve to be the collective consciousness of humanity, or more accurately, the human machine collective. So there's no humanity for him. It's a human machine collective that he is citing. And we got to do a class on the evil versus the good noosphere battles. Like there's two different. Okay, I'm aching to do that. It's going to be fun. Okay, we'll do that. But yeah, they got a very Chaldinian, eugenics oriented view of the noosphere as being a domain which is, again, spiritualized ideas. So they think of just like, they don't believe in the soul, but they believe in the artifacts of things that the soul or that the mind can do, which is, we make technological progress, but in their mind, because they're not actually the ones who make the discoveries, they steal discoveries from actual creative people, and then they co-opt them and try to use them. So because they partially don't truly understand the thing that they're using, they're just stealing ideas. They've created a whole system. Marshall McLuhan, I think, played a role in also giving some meat on the bones of this theory that technology increases the void of human agency, and technology thus, which captures and shapes the identities of every individual born within an age, is that they're shaped by it's the whole idea the medium is the message of that McLuhan promoted, right? That our powers of cognition, of memory will be reduced the more we rely on technologies to replace those functions of memory as we develop the written word, right? We have pens, we got paper, that's technology. So the ways we write things down and develop the idea of using symbols that encode higher complex ideas, our minds don't need to use memory, and we lose that power. Yeah. And as Marshall McLuhan pointed out, when we entered the the electronics revolution of telecommunications using electricity for transmitting information, he was like, well, then our very powers of thinking per se were no longer needed, as machines would do that thinking for us, as automation would inevitably increase to then reduce all forms of labor that humans would typically do, to the point that humans would be obsolete, just barrels of vegetables that, So that thesis is bunk. It's unscientific. It's untrue. But they imposed it ideologically to create a whole cult of AI that cybernetics justified. With a certain set of associated beliefs. So when it comes to psychology, like they promote brands of science of mind that are purely ultimately behaviorist for the masses and a cult for the higher initiates. So people who've gone through the depth psychology of Jungian, like full Jungian depth psychology. They spend $100,000. They've put in the hours. They've gone through all of the rituals from the Red Book, and they've become totally self-actualized, channelers of Philemon, the demon in Abraxas. And they're there. And now they can create their own little sub-Carl Jungian cult with an exoteric and an esoteric teaching structure, right? And for those like maybe a Jordan Peterson lower level thing, they might get some good if they're out of the therapy. Sure. Oh yeah, that's the Apollo Sun and Templar Cross that Jung painted in his fucked up book. There's anyway. But yeah, and like what appears to be some earth goddess, priestess, spread eagle or something. I don't know what that is. Over a mountain. Anyway. What is that I'm looking at there? She's holding up the Apollonian. What is that? She's floating on the cloud with some claw coming out of her vagina or something. What is this? That's messed up.
That is what it looks like. And then it looks like some like octopus tentacle thing. Yeah.
Yeah. What a great, brilliant mind that Carl Jung, eh? Yeah. So yeah, he's primarily, first and foremost, he's a sorcerer. He's a wannabe, sorcerer who literally writes about his own experiences, having tapped into the Mithraic mysteries, having gone through all of the initiatory experiment. He writes about that firsthand. He writes about the need to infiltrate and destroy Christianity and restore the soothsaying, the Jesus that was the soothsaying God of the vine, that of Dionysian frenzy. That's what he wants to restore. That had all of the passions, where man was elevated to the status of the passionate animal. So he believes that we have to elevate ourselves to become the a sexualized weird form of animal lust that animates our freedom, our liberty from the Apollonian artificial structures of social control that keep us behaving in a certain artificial way against our self-actualized self. So he writes about these things. He writes about Basilides, him channeling Basilides and his writings from the dead Templars that were giving him great inspiring messages so he's writing about all these things. But yet he's treated like he's a respected scientist of the mind. It's like, no, he's an occultist first and maybe a grafted on persona of a respected psychologist afterwards. But so is Freud, there's people who've been through Freudian psychoanalysis and they were having a bad time and it might have benefited them, and not going to disparage that, but it I think benefited them when you had, oh, look at that. Yeah, it's some weird Odin with eagle wings. Yeah, it's strange. Yeah. So yeah, his stuff.
And the snakes at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. What Jordan Peterson thinks is just the most profound paintings in the world. Oh, that's Philemon there, right there. Yeah. They got some William James paintings, another Swedenborgian freak. Yeah, it's weird. So, Freud as well was a guy who was a practicing Kabbalist, very, himself was sexually molested, it seems, or at least his sisters were. It seems like he might have been too. And he certainly had some peculiar choice of friends amongst some of the most rampant pedophiles that his theories seem to conveniently defend nicely by generating certain assumptions about the psyche where all children naturally want to have sex.
The Oedipus complex, yeah. Well, and his practices with hysteria, right? Like he would bring the women in, and we won't expound on that, but they were odd.
Yeah, and then you had the people who benefit by some Jungian psychoanalysis are probably people who just had a good person who was their psychologist asking them questions which nobody was that's usually why people often have problems. One of the elements is that they're isolated. They're not able to put their feelings into words, and having a good friend or somebody who's got some experience trying to help people self-reflect goes a long way. And so talking about your dreams.
It's part of what a confession is in religion. I think that's part of why if you think about it, it's kind of therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could be a healthy school of the confession. And then you got the Jesuitical intelligence. Let's make you dependent. Let's feed your vices, says the Jesuit advisor to the prince. Let's give you enough opportunities to become a shame-based barrel of hedonistic mush that feels
that's not the kind of
and you're gonna then I'll be here to receive your confession of what you did last night. And the more you do that, the more you're, one, dependent on me, and number two, I got more dirt to hold against you.
Blackmail.
It's expedient. Yeah, exactly. But I'm there to encourage you that, if you want to be part of that orgy, God won't judge you. You got your reasons. And so that's the bad side of the confession. Idea.
There's that. Sure.
But so you got the good and the bad. And you've pointed out there's a good. I think that's true. There is. So the same thing for the Freudians, the Jungians. There's probably some mechanically useful. I was having a bad time in my life some years ago, and John Bradshaw, his work on the healing the inner child, it helped me a lot. But at the same time, I'm also aware that he was super affected and was playing into a lot of these Esalen gurus. And a big part of what they were doing was getting people to become so focused on themselves and not passing judgment on the sickness of the society that they happen to be born into, which is the first place to look when you're looking for why am I feeling sick, is to look at, well, what are the contexts in which I'm born? And you might find that there is super perverse evil around and abound you that is demanding that you destroy your conscience and adapt to standards that are unnatural, and that on a deep spiritual level is suffocating. And you may not understand why that is, but it's going to produce all sorts of neurotic problems and tendencies towards looking for ways to soothe the pain with addictions of any sort to just make it, make me functional. And that then just becomes a self-feeding, spiritual wound. Mm-hmm. And so a healthy mind, like Martin Luther King gave this brilliant speech making the point that, being well-adjusted, psychologically well-adjusted in a sick society is not a sign of mental health. It's a sign. Being maladjusted is a good thing. But he was, and then the actual Satanists will use what he says, and bad people will use that to try to provoke. They will try to provoke people to then become the Luciferian rebels to overthrow the society. Like they're doing with these eco-extinction rebellion kids. They will cite what Martin Luther King said sometimes, and they will say, oh, yes, see, it is Greta Thunberg, right? We should shut down industrial civilization because it's a sick thing making me sick, and my depression is caused by having industry, and we should destroy the pipelines. And it's like, whoa, you've just been duped. But doesn't make what you just said. Right?
I think
you should just try to end empire, because what Martin Luther King was looking at was, let's get rid of empire and create a society whereby everybody has opportunities to develop their full potentials. That's different from destroy the society.
Well, and it's also different from, I think the way that they've extrapolated that is that you're a victim. And so, of course, you have to, you have to now oppress the victimizer, right? We have to get rid of, or we have to revolutionize because you're being oppressed.
Right,
so, just because you're maladjusted, because you're in a, bad circumstance, like there, oftentimes when somebody has anxiety or depression, you could look at, this might be a temporal situation that's causing that. And that would be a good thing to examine rather than, well, you're just a victim and, we'll just medicate you. I mean, that's really where they go next. But Freud and Jung were advocates of that too. They, back then it was psychedelics and cocaine versus vice versa. But yeah.
And so you see the loyal advocates of Jung today, and like Jordan Peterson promotes, he does it to himself, he's done it to his kids, psychological, different chemicals to try to like rewire your brain chemistry in order to become happy as if like that has any relationship to the metaphysics of happiness. No, it's totally plays into this whole cybernetics deconstruction of mankind around this. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm at a loss for words, right? Because it's so pathetically wrong. And I love that diagram. That's fantastic.
Right? Isn't that awesome?
Well done.
That is one of my favorites. It's got all the elements. It has the Hegelian dialectical spiral. It has the Ouroboros. This is for people who are not watching, they're listening, but the Pied Piper, and it's him in the two-face suit, which he's become his signature now. But
his it's literally a two-face suit. It's this fire and ice blending merger thing. Yeah, he's gone full Jungian. Yeah. No, it's pretty. That's a sad case. But yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, right? Because you look at it, and that's why I started my book in a way that I know is going to lose some people. But my first chapter, I was like, I gotta focus on the light, because what is the oligarchy afraid of? And in my first chapter of the Mystery Babylon, I really wanted to get across the situation of a healthy ecumenical example of alliance amongst various dominant Abrahamic religions.
Debunk the Khazarian myth.
Yeah, at the same time, right? Because you had this Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Confucian, Chinese alliance of cultures that found a way to harmonize around an idea that respected each other's differences, while at the same time acting in accordance with the common good of everybody as made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable creator. And you saw the geopolitical effects that are measurable. You can read the writings of people who lived at that time, documenting this incredible creative maneuvering amongst true philosopher kings and their advisors who wrote things down, like Alcuin of York, who was the advisor and an Augustinian Platonist advising Charlemagne, who had these incredible maneuvers that he pulled off with his friend Harun al-Rashid in the Muslim Abbasid dynasty, who had amazing advisors that set up these houses of wisdom that had Jews and Christians and Muslims all working together on astronomy. They were inviting Indians in. And again, always based upon avoiding war, looking for points of common interest that are authentic, not artificial, sharing poetry, sharing inventions. And the Silk Road of those days was the sort of the thing that made it was the secret sauce that made that type of interconnectivity work as far as a dialogue of cultures. And that's what the Crusades were designed to destroy. It was too much of a threat that was even possible. So they had to do this, get everyone to just start killing each other. It took a couple of centuries. They finally did it. And it wasn't a Christian phenomenon. And it wasn't Jewish, and it wasn't a Muslim issue. It was that you had Gnostic, anti-Muslim, fake Muslims operating in mystery sects, mystery schools that created things like the Assassin Order of Nizari Ismailis that were baked in as a secret society that interfaced and closely worked with the New Templar cultists and the followers of the secret order of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, the Knights Hospitaller, doing left-hand, right-hand paths, always working to kill each other. They would even, Muslims, the Muslim assassins would take contracts from the crusading Christians, like Richard the Lionheart, who gave a contract to the Nizari assassins to go and kill one of his opponents, who was the king of Jerusalem, to go and make space for his nephew, who he wanted in there. And, these assassins did their job, but they were caught by Saladin later on in the Third Crusade. And Saladin caught them, forced a confession, and got them to admit that Richard the Lionheart had actually commissioned his nominally enemy Muslim counterparts to go and do this. And Saladin had survived 2 different major assassination attempts. And he was a good guy. He was like a Charlemagne character of the Arab world, who was like one of these heightened philosopher kings. And there's a few of them, very few, but when they arise, the oligarchy gets really afraid, because they do a lot of good. And the oligarchy can only get everyone to try to get stupid people to kill each other, and then try to undo their memory, and then respin their memory into something that's more useful for the oligarchy. So they say that, Saladin was an alchemical high priest, and there's an order of Saladin that they created after Saladin was dead. They created an order with his name to try to co-opt his name, just like they did for Charlemagne, giving Zelensky a Charlemagne Prize. And who did that? It was Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, who created the Charlemagne Prize to unify Europe. But he hates everything Charlemagne stood for. He just likes the name and the practical effect of consolidating control over a big territory, as Charlemagne had done. He likes that command and control, but he doesn't like the spirit of Augustinian love of the people and growth of like the pulling, training orphans to read, pulling people out of poverty, building infrastructure, taking down the corrupt oligarchy of the Merovingian sorcerer kings, which Charlemagne did with his father and grandfather. Like, they hate that stuff. They want to revive that stuff, but they like the control part. I would also say, on that note, in my research, that's how I'm also looking at China today, because they like the command and control of China, but they don't like the actual pulling people out of poverty, the utilization of national credit to build these beautiful cities, which have like 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail that's super cheap, and like really smart people that are like building up high levels of excellence and making discoveries. Like, they don't like that stuff, but they like the command control part of China, which they want to like use everywhere else.
Yeah. They say that all the time. That's the model. Yeah.
Well, but at the same time, it's kind of also imposing, like they're imposing what they want onto China too, because I would say when it comes to social credit is the big thing that I don't like about China. But at the same time, as I say that, it's in China, but it's not done by the Chinese government. So the social credit, the actual social credit that's the biggest issue is run by Alibaba and Ant Group, which is actually, its headquarters are in the British Cayman Islands, and the Carlyle Group is one of the dominant investors. Jack Ma was the guy who ran for the World Economic Forum. He's the Bill Gates of China, and he ran Ant Group and Alipay. And they were things that were tricking Chinese people into getting predatory loans, and it was like easy money that you would just get access to, turning them into debt slaves, and also that would assign numbering systems to their social credit that they would opt into and put on their phones and stuff. That also gave so you've got that, but that's again at war with the Chinese government, because Jack Ma tried to call for the overthrow of the Chinese government and the taking down, like he called for a whole libertarian overhaul of the Chinese banking system in 2020, which is when they removed him from power and made him a school teacher. There's like these giant legal battles where they've pulled Ant Group into court right now. Like it's been going on for 4 years. So there's like this clash going on in China between these Carlyle Group, World Economic Forum penetrations and the patriotic groupings in China that don't want to go with the death cult that kicked out Soros. So you got these clashes going on. But then in the West, what we do is like we're shown there's a ton of arguments and spin that make it seem like it's the Chinese initiative to do all of these bad things and lock people in their homes and to destroy their ability to. Now, the social credit that is Chinese government is applied to the corporate sector. That's one that has been around now for about 10 years. And that one is real. But at the same time, when you look at like the influence that these multi-billion-dollar corporations have over the political structures, I could understand why you'd want to put corporations on a credit system, because there's so much corruption, and they're often under the interest of the CIA, MI6, and other foreign interests that will be able to use that power within China to subvert China itself from within. So they've been trying to also get a handle on a lot of these very rich, influential power blocks that are tied to the Bilderbergs and force their behavior to accommodate the national interest. So that's part of that aspect of it. The last thing I would say on the point of China is that in the last 12 years, there's been 4.9 million Chinese party officials that have Communist Party officials that have gone to jail, including some really. Yeah. It began in 2012. And it's been in like historic. Like you can look at, they've got just 2 weeks ago, the former governor of the Bank of China was given a 26-year sentence for corruption.
Wow.
2 heads of China's Interpol, 2 former heads of China's intelligence services were given life sentences. Wow. high level people. And when you look at what these people were doing, like they were working for the World Economic Forum. They were working for like the thing that has taken over our society.
Very infiltrated.
Yeah. So I'm seeing like battle lines and hard fights going on. And oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, Trump's going to meet up with Xi Jinping pretty soon.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll see where that goes. I don't know. But there's definitely like the war hawks are pushing for just, so you got all of this stuff going on. There's battle lines, there's drama, and I don't want to like try to make it seem like there's like this Manichaean all good or all bad. There's deep state structures in China. But my thing I've been trying to do for the past few years is encourage people to map out the deep, like, we talked about during your class to my group a couple of weeks ago, which is such a fantastic class. Everyone should watch that on Game B. But you brought up, so you painted the Game B picture pretty brilliantly. And then we talked a little bit about like, where does Game B express itself in China? And I brought up the example of this Gregory Bateson or like system that was called the Foundation for the Eternal Feminine, but they got kicked out. So they got shut down, even though they had brainwashed, like because it was all based upon, they had $600 million that was set up in 2016 to set them up. And it was designed to brainwash, to bring the super rich single children girls who are the heirs of these giant fortunes to go to communes in Texas and California to get brainwashed to become these feminine, righteous earth mother, like, strong women who could then fight the masculine toxic energy of China's state government, right? So that was part of the thing. They pretty much got inoculated and shut down. But there's another one that's more successful, and that's the Nicholas Berggruen Institute.
Okay.
I just found out from our mutual buddy, Peter Duke. He mapped this group out quite a bit. They're behind a big chunk of the reset in California. Nicholas Berggruen.
He has been talking about this. Yeah.
And his institute has 3 headquarters, one in Venice, one in California, and the newest one in Beijing, which, unlike the Society for the Eternal Feminine, I see it as more dangerous because the Society for the Eternal Feminine was so ideologically anti-Confucian. Like that was their whole point, was to get rid of Confucius, restore Taoism, which is kind of like the same fight between Plato and Aristotle that's shaped the West. It's kind of like similar to the battle between the Taoist versus Confucian systems and representatives shaping all of
I studied that extensively in 9th grade.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I did. I read the Tao of Pooh and then the De of Piglet, that whole series, and then that sent me on like a dive. So yeah.
Yo, that's funny. Winnie the Pooh got you to become a Chinese scholar. That's funny. Yeah. So yeah, what these guys are doing that's more sophisticated and dangerous is that they're promoting themselves as Neo-Confucians, using a language that's a little bit more charming to the they're right there.
Sorry.
I wouldn't be surprised. Who's the guy who made Winnie the Pooh? What was his name? Like Christopher was the child in the story, but the guy
Robin.
Christopher Robin.
Kenny Loggins sang a song about him.
Right?
Out from the corner. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I watched the show when I was a little kid. I didn't really read the books. I was watching. There was a little cartoon show there. But I know they did a Hollywood movie on the dude who came up with the story, and I forgot the
Millen. Yeah.
Millen. Yeah, there was some shady stuff about him too.
Sure. Yeah. But okay. So you were saying that it's more dangerous.
So they're really marketing themselves in a pro-Confucian language, which is more charming and seductive to the Chinese intelligentsia, which I'm a little bit more worried about. It seems like they're gaining more traction,
right?
As the Game B inside of China. So that was put on my radar with like having just reevaluated what these things are there, or also what they are in Russia.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned. We'll see. But that's the cybernetics penetration. That's the Gaia cult. But again, masquerading kind of like the way the Neoplatonists do in the West. That's what they do with the Neo-Confucians in China. So we'll see. But again, every country's got a battle. The U.S. has its battle.
And then there's the overarching battle, right?
Yeah.
Because they're trying to bring them all into one. And then the technological aspect. I did find that there's, my theory that they were going to bring game B to the network state, and this is going to be a part of how it'll all unfold. Well, apparently on the network state website, there's like all these different companies that are part of the network state. And of course, a lot of them are what you would expect, like Prospera, Peter Thiel's Bitcoin Cities is on there. But Game B is pending approval.
Oh, yeah. It's not necessarily allowed in the club yet?
Not yet. It's pending approval.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
I tried initiating myself into Game B. They have a little form if you want to see their website. They're like, fill out your form if you want to be
initiated. They haven't accepted me yet.
No, me neither. Yeah. I really wanted to see what they got on that website.
I know. I have been checking out some of their other pages, but I'm starting to think I might need to create some, anonymous handles.
Yeah.
I just doubted myself, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. We should. This is not filming, right?
Yeah, right.
This has been a personal conversation this whole time, right?
Totally.
Yeah, okay, good.
So, well, we can close out, but just tell people what I'm curious. What would you like people to take away from your books? Because it is well over 1,000 pages. There's a lot in there. And some of it seems like it's not like some of it goes really far back in history. So you might not think that it's all that relevant today. I would disagree. I think it's very relevant, as you aptly title it, The Revenge of the Mystery Cults. So I think we are very much, it pertains to what we're seeing. But what would you like people to get?
Well, yeah, and they all end at the same place. So they all have different trajectories, and they all end with the same sort of story. And so it was kind of the first time I ever did something like that. I don't know if anybody's ever done that before, but it worked out pretty well organically. What I want people to get out of that is sort of the thesis I lay out in especially chapter 6 of Rosicrucian Golem and chapter 1 of the Mystery Babylon, which is that the oligarchy is afraid ultimately of some very basic facts of reality that everybody can know if they use their creative reasoning, which is their conscience and their reason rigorously working together, which is that the universe all evidence shows us that the universe is not random. It's not cold. It's not devoid of love and reason. It's that we seem to exhibit the quality of being made in the image of a creator, a living, loving, reasonable creator that we can discover using reason and true love, like higher agapic love, and resonate ever more perfectly without ever achieving it perfectly, in harmony with that intention that animates the beauty of all of creation. And it seems like all of the people that I have read who have moved history in a good direction at great expense to their own physical well-being in many cases, and willingness to even lose their life for the sake of the health of their soul and conscience, though they've all tapped into that same insight and live sometimes, though suffering a bit physically or a lot, happy, satisfied with their conscience in ways that people who might seem wealthy and seem powerful are actually miserable deep down psychologically and consciously. They're actually the most servile, slavish, pathetic, and also self-hating people. And they externalize that it seems to me that the source of their hate of humanity is the hate of themselves, because of the reprehensible unnaturalism that they put themselves through and that they are put through, kind of as like golem-like victims of the system that they were groomed by. So it's a pathetic thing. And I really want people to be, I guess, aware of the unnaturalism of oligarchical systems per se, and the much more natural goodness of that thing that we all have inside of us that can result in us participating in the greater flow of human history in various amplitudes. Like, not everybody can be a Ben Franklin or a Martin Luther King, but everybody can participate in truth and substance and be an amplifier in that higher flow of moral development of the universe as a whole, which would satisfy God's will, I believe, of us as instruments of creation. So anyway, that's the sort of like spirit I want people to come out of, even though they're going to be taken into some dark shit. And it gets really fucking dark. I'm so sorry, but yeah, I think, but the more you know evil, the more you can sort of, I think, understand how to avoid it and how to see elements, sparks of that in ourselves. Like, where is our weaknesses? Because there's a little oligarch as a principle inside of everybody, I think. And there's always going to be temptation. There's always going to be like little blind spots. We will never be fully self-actualized, fully self-aware, but we can make, so we can become more aware of where those weaknesses, those corrupting things are within ourselves that the oligarchy wants us to be owned by. If we're not aware of them, they will grow. So that's another aspect of what I'm hoping by looking at the life of people who made the leap through the fire, like Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
Not Elon so much. He seems to be a sad one. I feel bad for the creep. I feel really bad for him. I do. But
Dark MAGA?
Yeah, the dark MAGA. Yeah, he's sort of. So that's the sort of thing I'm hoping people come out of that with that more empowered sense of being. And that's it. I mean, beyond that, I don't really know what the effects might be, but that's the general gist.
Well, I think I think you conveyed that, and I think that those would be great things to take away. I think it's pretty profound. So I think you did incredible work. I encourage everybody to read it. I will personally have to reread because I read it kind of like, in pieces and over time, and there's so much there. I don't really know how you did all of that in what seemed like a pretty short period of time. So
it was 1 year. It was an intense year. I got started on this when Cynthia basically jumped in and saved the UFO videos that I was trying to work on for like 3 years. I was trying to make these videos on the UFO psyops and I couldn't make it work. And then she's like, she looked at my script and she's like, no, it's because you're not bringing in the ancient mystery cults. I was like, what? And she's like, and she just made this. I was like, let me see how you would treat it. So she wrote a script and it forced me to like completely rethink everything and put me on this sort of path about 1.5 years ago. And since then, it kind of spawned into what you just saw there with these 3 books.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I've started her book, and I'm very much looking forward to finishing that and having that conversation as well. So,
cool.
Yeah, you've both uncovered quite a rich history, and as I keep saying, I feel like a broken record, but it seems so relevant today because all of these don't seem like they went away. They just seem like they've gone underground and they've rebranded. Even when they officially got shut down, it just seems like they've resurfaced, and
Yeah, stubborn fucking bastards. Yeah, I'm sorry for the language, but really, it pisses me off to see how they just latch on and just they don't let go easily. You gotta kind of burn them off.
Well, I would say that if people, regardless of your worldview, it very much seems like there is a spiritual battle. And it's, whether you believe that it is, really a literal battle of God versus Satan or, Luciferian variation, which it kind of looks that way, whether it's literal or not, that at least metaphorically, it kind of looks that way. But at the very least, there does seem to be, there's the people who have a shared worldview and who are very invested in seeing that come to a certain result come to fruition. And then people on the other side, and again, there's different variations on that side too. I don't think that there's a one light per se. Like, I mean, the real light, not the false light. But, the people who believe in, whether it's Christian or traditional Judaism or, I think there's, whatever belief system that people subscribe to, I think that there is, a version that is light where they believe in, as you said, like a rational, benevolent, reasonable creator who loves us, who endowed us with free will. And I think, that's, what a gift. And to me, it's why I started the podcast. I always say this, and it sounds so grandiose when I say it out loud, because I don't really think that I'm going to preserve the free will of humanity, but it is to hopefully inspire people to exercise their free will and to be a part of the movement to ensure that that is not eradicated, which is what I see these cults is really doing. They and certainly the transhuman sect of it is very invested in ensuring that we do not have free will and we are a part of some sort of collective conscience, intelligence, hive-borg mind, whatever variation it is. But that's not the one I watch. So yeah.
Amen. Preach, sister.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Tell everybody where they can get your books and and find all your work and all that good stuff.
Yeah, okay. They can go to CanadianPatriot.org to find them the easiest. That's all of the books. There's a lot of them up there by the books. See that right there. I got some hard copies that we just had shipped in. So if people want some signed copies, Cynthia and I co-wrote the first one. So I could send those out if people send me an email to CanadianPatriot1776 at tutanota.com. I'll send you guys some complimentary copies, that'll come soon. And otherwise, there's RisingTideFoundation.net, which is the cultural educational platform we created, in that we do weekly meetings and stuff online that people can jump in on if they're paid subscribers. So that's our stuff.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll post the links below. Thank you so much, and thank you all for watching and listening. And thank you.